I want to show you what I've done with Gemini 3. At the time of recording, Gemini 3 was released yesterday. It was released on the 18th of November and was a fairly sort of quiet rollout from what it seems like, and then later on the emails and press announcements seemed to follow afterwards. And I have to say, I'm quite impressed so far. I'm not saying it's perfect, but honestly it seems to be quite a big improvement from Gemini 2.5. Perhaps that should be expected given that there was quite a long time gap between Gemini 2.5 and Gemini 3 compared to other companies where they're releasing them much faster, almost sort of month to month. So given it's been many months since Gemini 2.5, which came out not long after Gemini 2, I think it's only fair that we should get a big update. And at the same time, Google have also released an IDE, which they've created with the Windsurf team that they acqui-hired, and I believe they've licensed the technology of Windsurf in building this new IDE that they've called Gravity. I'm going to focus mostly on just the model and what I've done with it so far. I'm not going to say too much about Gravity, but I'll maybe show a little bit at the end. So I'm inside AI Studio, and this is aistudio.google.com, and I gave it one prompt, and I wanted it to build me a board game that's American football with a fantasy twist. Some of you will be familiar with this sort of idea already, or something very similar. And I said, include some magic, and there'll be maybe some strange settings. Now, it's somewhat ignored this last part, but it's took it on as a suggestion, as an idea, because there is actually magic, and it was in from the big. It's not fully implemented, but it is partially there. I should say. And what you see on the right is what it came up with after a single prompt. And there's a fair bit of complexity to this game, which I'm very impressed with because I've never seen this from another model create something so comprehensive from a single prompt. Like, it just wasn't there from a single prompt. And I'm quite stunned by that. If you read around like on Reddit or in some of the discords to do with coding, vibe coding, whatever, some people are a bit negative about the model, and I can understand that there are certain things where it's not going to be super polished or it's not going to be as good as Claude. But this is a huge improvement. This is a lot that you can do in a single prompt and like basically a playable game. With Claude, I find Claude to be very good for coding in general. It's very smooth. It seems to get my intent very well compared to other models, and then it comes up with a solution which tends to be correct more times than not. And obviously this is now where we are with Claude 4.5 at the time of recording versus previous Claude models. Previous Claude models were always good and probably always a bit ahead with coding, and then 4.5 even more so. So here's my quarterback. He's running down the line towards ball. I also have a catcher who runs the fastest. There's a wizard who actually has a spell bar or spell action. It doesn't fully work. However, you can click it and you can see that you could click on one of the spells. So it's in the UI, and then it's just a case of trying to wire that up. I'll add, just for clarity, that since I played the game, I added 2 more prompts, one of which was to get diagonal running, which it didn't have. It's a small thing, and it was just because it had Manhattan distance for the allowable squares, which basically means you either go up, down, left or right. You couldn't do a diagonal, but that's been changed. Tackling was working. I wasn't sure in the beginning, but it definitely was from the very first prompt. And then throwing and catching, I think it was wired in something very simple, but you couldn't quite do it. There was a conflict with actions and buttons and whatever else. And then the other prompt that I gave it was just about getting it figured out. I think it ignored that in the second one. Again, it's a small thing that it maybe didn't do it perfectly, but that's okay. So there, basically one major prompt and then 2 other smaller prompts to get things polished up, and this is what we have. This is a 2-player game, so it's 2 human players. It's not an AI opponent, but that could be wired in. Wouldn't be that hard to get something. And you can get the ball, you can pick it up, you can pass it, you can tackle, and you can score. So when you score a touchdown, you get 7 points. So it will be somewhat familiar, I guess, to either things like rugby or American football that have similar scoring systems, not exactly the same. But of course, that's what it's meant to be based upon. That's what I asked for. One thing I didn't ask for was this AI commentary bar on the right-hand side. It's just something that Google kind of just jammed in there and assumed that I wanted it. And I have to say that, well, yeah, I guess I want to keep it, actually. At first I wasn't sure. I was like, oh, do I really want this? Maybe I should just rip it out. But actually, it's quite nice. So there will be a call probably to the Gemini API, and it will give me a summary of what's happening within the game. And you can see there's even a log of what's happening. It says move 1 square at a time. So this is like a complaint that I've maybe tried to move too many squares at the one time. And that's just how the rules are at the moment. You move 1 square at a time until you end your turn. Not a biggie. So even though I didn't ask for it, this is something that AI Studio does, is it wants you to use the Gemini API. It wants you to spend money. So of course it's a very Google thing that it wants you to spend money with Google so they can make more money. However, not getting completely pessimistic or black-pilled about that, it is a nice feature. It is something which I didn't really think about adding. Maybe somewhere in the back of my mind I was like, oh, you could add an AI, whatever. But hey, this is actually quite nice. I mean, you could even make that like a chat bar if it was you versus another friend, and then you could wire in some multiplayer, because why not? So that's one thing that I wanted to mention about Gemini and where I think it's been good. It's a single prompt that's created this, and I've honestly just never seen anything like that before from a single prompt, and I think that's huge. Let me take you back in time a little bit to Gemini 2.5, when I gave basically the same prompt to Gemini 2.5. This is what it created. Now, it could be that I tweaked the wording ever so slightly, because I was talking about like a concept, and I said, okay, here, help me with this concept. And so, I don't know, in fact, I've even got concept here. I think when I talked to Gemini 3, I've got concept, but I think I also asked for basically the same thing. I mean, I maybe made a slight tweak. Unfortunately, this conversation has been killed by Google in the time, but you can see that this is obviously not really quite the same. I believe I can press this button at the bottom and it will generate something that will connect to the Gemini API, I think. And I got a feeling that this is going to connect to 2.5. However, because things have changed, Google may have made some big updates in the back end where this could be very, very different now whenever I press. Okay, now this actually looks quite similar to what I had before with Gemini 2.5. So this does feel kind of like Gemini 2.5. So, some of the lore and the ideas I like, and I like what I like the ideation. They've got 2 teams, the Crimson Dragonkin, the Verdant Grove Guardians. That's cool. I like this. It's got some cool names for the I guess is this meant to be the roster? So it felt like maybe it was like skills. So they've got a Leaf Whisperer, which is a quarterback. So they've mixed things around a little bit here, but not really a big problem. Talk about magical elements, field monsters. So they have players, and they have people that I can click, players that I can click on, but I can't really do anything. I can't move around. I mean, it's kind of nice that it's rendered something. And there's some graphics, but I can't really do much. Look, there's a next player button, so I can hop around from player to player, as you can see there. It's a little bit clunky, and it's in some ways it's nice that something is created from a single prompt, but it's not really something that's playable. And I think this is quite a big difference between what we have here, which is nice with text and ideas, compared to something with Gemini 3, which is actually playable. It's cut down on a lot of the text, so you can't really see some of the ideation, some of the ideas, whatever. But it has got such nice little features that you can see the little wizard icon, which is kind of grayed out here. And it correctly identifies that this player's the wizard. It's given it an icon. So each of the different players have an icon that is associated with their type. And I think that's really quite cool. Again, it's a small thing, but if you imagine all the little decisions that have to go into making that, and what comes out again from a single prompt. You can see here on the left side the number of files that were created on the first go. So I think that is actually quite a big win. Now, this video we're running about 10 minutes or so, which is not bad, and I'm not going to go on for too much longer. I'm going to hop in very briefly into anti-gravity, which is here. I haven't done a lot with anti-gravity, if I'm honest. You can get access to Gemini 3 Pro high and low. Now these are preview versions. They're free, and there's also Claude Sonnet 4.5, which is also free, and then GPT 120. So Google will be hosting its own GPT OSS somewhere in its cloud. It seems that they don't have access to OpenAI. Maybe there's some tension there, so they just skip those models. Doesn't really matter. GPT OSS is fine for a little bit of coding. It's obviously not going to be the same as Claude Sonnet nor with Gemini 3. So one of the biggest annoyances of this is that you get a very limited number of credits. Now it is free, so of course they don't want you to generate too much. But at the moment I don't think you can pay for it. You don't actually have any option to actually pay for a proper plan, which is kind of annoying, that if you were really enjoying using Gemini 3, there's no other way to really go further. And that's the same inside AI Studio. You can do only so much before it says, okay, you've kind of used your limits. So immediately what you'll notice is that this looks very much like VS Code, and therefore it looks like a cursor, and unsurprisingly it looks like Windsurf. It is very much similar to how Windsurf looks and the others, because obviously the people behind the team at Google who came up with anti-gravity are from Windsurf, and they're even licensing the technology. The deal was like a sort of a $2.5 billion deal for this sort of acqui-hire, and it's maybe not a surprise that you've got something that looks a lot like Windsurf as an end result. Some people in Discord, the one that I'm in, are complaining that the agentic capabilities with Gemini 3 are not quite as polished as Claude, that it's not as smooth, that it's not as good as creating files, at editing files, or doing the things that you get used to with Claude. And I can understand that that is a frustration, because it is. And I find the same things when I work with GPT 5.1. It's not as fluent as Claude at doing things like creating files. Sometimes I have to say to GPT 5.1 or 5, create this file, and then it doesn't do it, and then I have to ask it again, okay, you haven't done this, please create a new file and put this content into that new file, which is a strange thing, but it just seems that it's not quite as competent at using the tool calls as Claude is. And these are not MCPs, these are, I believe, tool calls, and there's probably special tokens that the Claude model has to use whenever it does a tool call, and I think that is separate from MCP. Probably there's special MCP tokens, I would imagine, that is required in order to call the MCP, because everything that goes into an LLM has to be a token. That's just how they work. They operate on tokens. So that suggests that there are some areas where it's not going to be so smooth. However, I think that can be fixed. If it's basically Windsurf with a different skin, which, I mean, it's not going to be exactly Windsurf with a different skin, but let's say that it was, it's going to be good, because Windsurf by itself right now is already good. Yeah, so I think that's everything that I really want to say. I'm suitably impressed with Gemini 3 so far. I'm sure there's headaches, I'm sure there's things that don't quite work, and I'm sure there's things that could definitely be improved, but it is definitely an improvement from Gemini 2.5, and I think it is at least competitive with Claude as a coder. But there'll be pros and cons. Probably Claude 4.5 is still going to be the best overall, smoothed out model for when it comes to coding tasks, but I think Gemini 3 could be a real competitor. Now, in a couple of weeks or in a couple of months, it may find out that that's not quite the case, that one is maybe much better than the other, but that's not my feeling right now. However, if that's what happens, then certainly I can follow up with another video to see how things have changed. I mean, Gemini 2.5, when it was released, was okay. You could code with it and you could do something, and it was kind of competitive at the time, but there were just so many little sort of headaches and frustrations that you'd have with it that made it not really that great compared to all the other models, and so I never really reached for Gemini 2.5. It just wasn't one that I really wanted to use. So that's me for this video. Thanks for watching. I hope that was informative in some way, and hopefully it was interesting to show you what we can do with vibe coding and vibe gaming. I mean, it's a little bit more than just going with vibes, but hey, that's what's sticking. It's vibe engineering, perhaps. Hopefully you can like this video and subscribe if you want to see more videos like this. If you follow my links below, you can there's a referral to Windsurf, and there's also my GitHub, and if you want to also hit some stars there, that's always appreciated. If there's things that you like, you can leave comments too, and I'll see if I can get to that. Thank you very much for your time, and I'll see you in the next video.